the most extreme stories of royal disgrace is that of Prince Sado, heir to the Korean throne. Born in 1735, the prince suffered from severe mental illness and delusions. In her remarkable memoirs, his wife, Lady H, recalled what happened as his disease progressed. The prince began to kill. The first person he killed was the eunuch who happened to be on duty that day. The prince came in with the severed head and displayed it to the ladies-in-waiting. Lady H said the redness-soaked head, the first I ever saw, was simply a horrifying sight. As if he had to kill to release his rage, the prince harmed many ladies-in-waiting. I suffered so for this. His illness seeped deeper and deeper, and now that he was killing people, our quarters became a house of horrors in which no one could be certain they would not fall victim. Eventually, the prince went so far as to thrash his favorite mistress to death and began to threaten his own sister. In 1762, realizing that his disgusting conduct would spell the ruin of the Korean royal family, his mother appealed to his father, the king. The horrible disease ever worsens. There is no hope. As a mother, this humble person can hardly bear to say this, but it is only right that your majesty secure the dynasty by protecting your person and the grand heir. Please make this decision. Since tradition dictated that Lady H and her son would also have to be punished if the prince was executed, the king came up with a bizarre solution to safeguard his daughter-in-law and heir. On a sweltering day in July, the king forced the prince to step into a rice chest that was then locked, so that technically the disgraced prince had caused his own death. He died 8 days later. Honestly, I think that's a brilliant way of dealing with the awful situation and protecting innocent people. I'm normally not pro-killing, but you look at the alternative. Let's see if you can figure out who I'm talking about next. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Yep, Henry VIII. How'd you know? Jeepers, buddy, one wife wasn't enough. Henry desperately wanted to annul his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon, but that was strictly forbidden by the Pope. So Henry was like, okay, I'll create my own church, the Church of England, which he did in 1534 and appointed himself its head. Now free to do what he wanted, he married 5 more times and had 2 of those wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, beheaded. Imagine having a spouse executed because you didn't like them anymore. I know that's a bit of an oversimplification, but damn! Ooh, here's another edition of someone the 8th being awful. Edward. Buddy boy had some ties to the Yahtzees. After he abdicated the throne in 1936, he became the Duke of Windsor, and in 1937 visited the evil German dictator and reportedly gave him the evil salute. As it turns out, telegrams revealed the Germans were later planning to kidnap the Duke and reinstate him as King of England as a sort of puppet for their evil organization. I swear to God, I don't mean to sound like I'm talking about a cartoon supervillain, but there are just so many words that I'm not allowed to say, so I'm hoping you can all read between the lines or just find your answers in the comment section. So that didn't happen, as the Duke was appointed governor of Bermuda and then went on to become a figure in another weird case, that of Sir Harry Oakes. This man was a visionary in the gold mining industry, having made his fortune in Kirkland Lake before moving to the Bahamas. On the evening of July 8th of 1943, shortly after midnight, Harry had his life brutally ended. He was struck 4 times behind the left ear with a miner's handpick to disguise the wounds from a silver ice pick, and then was burned all over his body using insecticide, with the flames being concentrated around the eyes. Here's where it gets really weird. His body was then sprinkled with feathers from a mattress. When he was discovered, the feathers were still being gently blown over his body by the bedroom fan. Now Edward, who had become a close friend of Harry's during the previous 3 years, took charge of the investigation from the get-go, inviting 2 American policemen he knew from Miami to take over the case instead of locals. In my opinion, he was either a dunce or helped cover up the true story. The 2 policemen had forgotten their fingerprint kits, but the local cops had fingerprint kits. So by the second day of the investigation, 36 hours after the body was discovered, they had arrested the son-in-law, Count Alfred de Marigny. He's not a popular fellow. He was on bad terms with Sir Harry Oakes, thanks to his playboy way of life and lack of a meaningful career, and also he'd been married twice before marrying Harry's daughter, and also he didn't ask for permission to marry Harry's daughter, which big no. Alfred was acquitted in a trial that lasted several weeks because the detectives were suspected of fabricating evidence against him. One of those things being a fingerprint, which one of the officers claimed had been found in Oakes' bedroom where the body had been found, but it turns out it was actually lifted from a water glass that Alfred had used during his questioning by the captains. So who killed Sir Harry? Well, we don't know. There's been a lot of theories. We could talk about the killer reappearing from Oakes' past, rage-filled secret lover, hitmen sent from the mob, pardon the sidebar. But I think it's a little suspicious and relevant that Edward was involved in so much badness. Also, if you want to know my theory on Sir Harry Oakes, the mob. In 1314, King Philip IV of France was feeling rather good about his dynasty. His daughter Isabel was Queen of England, and his 3 sons were neatly married off to a trio of noblewomen who were related to one another and ready to produce the next generation of French princes. Queen Isabel, eager to welcome her sisters-in-law to the family, made them each a present of distinctive and costly embroidered purses. And to her surprise, during the next family reunion, she spotted those purses hanging from the belts of a pair of brothers, knights at her father's court, at a time when prowess at arms made rock stars out of men who knew how to handle a lance. Wise to what this royal regifting meant, she ran off to tell her dad, and the king sent spies to watch his daughters-in-law. Within weeks, the trio of princesses were caught red-handed with their lovers at a decrepit old Parisian fortress called the Tour de Nesle. The lovers were tormented in ways that would make any character on Game of Thrones shudder, and finally executed, which must have come as a relief after all the castrating and flaying and oil boiling. The princesses were imprisoned underground in dank, filthy dungeons, with their heads shaved and their descendants disinherited. The king himself died shortly afterwards, so within a generation, King Philip's dynasty was destroyed, and the French throne passed to a distant cousin. The disagreement over who ought to inherit the crown sparked the 100 Years' War between England and France, plunging much of Western Europe into armed conflict that will last for the better part of a century, and all because of a trio of misbehaving princesses. In a delicious twist, it is said that the wreckage of King Philip's dynasty is due to a curse laid upon him by Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Templars, burned to death on bogus charges of witchcraft on the king's orders earlier in 1314. Here's a famous case and a half, the Duke of Cumberland's midnight intruder. Queen Victoria's uncles were notorious for their exploits and excessive drinking, gambling, seductions, and secret marriages, but none was as reviled as the Duke of Cumberland. In an age where character was supposedly mirrored by appearance, his sinister scar and violent temper marked him, in public opinion, as deeply malevolent. He was the least popular of King George's sons, and his reputation was not improved by the rumor that he had harmed more than one noblewoman and impregnated his own sister, Princess Sophia. His infamy was sealed on a dark spring night in 1810. In the early hours, he suddenly leapt out of bed, screaming for his servants that he had been attacked, struck violently in the head several times. Claiming to be suspicious that his valet, Joseph, had not responded to his shouts, he dispatched his staff to search for the man. They found the servant's door bolted from inside, and after forcing the lock, they discovered Joseph tucked in bed and nearly decapitated. Cumberland claimed, and an inquest agreed, that the valet took his own life, but most people believed that the valet had been attacked by Cumberland. The public speculated about motives for the attack, each more sensational than the last, and culminating in the explanation that the valet was slashed after fighting off the Duke's attempt to forcibly have intercourse with them. True or not, it was a heck of a story that followed the Duke for the rest of his life. May Queen Elizabeth II rest in peace, but she wasn't the simple, boring old queen that we all thought we knew. Recurring, brutal end-of-empire conflicts thus marred the first 30 years of her reign, beginning in Malaya, then in Kenya, Cyprus, Aden, Northern Ireland, and more. British security forces moved through the empire and acted in the Queen's name, unleashing wide-scale detention without trial and illegal deportations. In Malaya and Kenya, they forcibly relocated hundreds of thousands of subjects into barbed-wire villages, where forced labor and starvation were forms of colonial control. In each conflict, kill squads were deployed and populations terrorized. In Cyprus, journalists called interrogators HMTs, Her Majesty's tormentors. At the time, successive governments denied allegations of systemic violence, claiming any instance of brutality was isolated, the fault of individual colonial officials, so-called bad apples. What we know now, however, reveals a much different reality. Beginning with her first Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, the Queen's ministers not only knew of the systematic British-directed violence in the empire, they also participated in its crafting, diffusion, and cover-up, which was as routine as the violence itself. They repeatedly lied to Parliament and the media, and when decolonization was imminent, ordered the widespread removal and burning of incriminating evidence. Going back several hundred years now, Charles I was brought to trial in Westminster Hall on the 20th of January in 1649, following the end of the English Civil War. The king appeared before his judges 4 times, charged with tyranny and treason. The exchanges generally focused on the king challenging the court's authority and its right to try him. In the end, though, he was condemned to death on January 26th and beheaded 4 days later outside the Banqueting House in Whitehall, London. In the previous century, Mary, Queen of Scots, was implicated in the Babington Plot, a plan in 1586 to assassinate her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, and put Mary on the English throne. She faced trial for treason before a court of 36 noblemen, where she denied all charges, urging her triers to look to your consciences and remember that the theater of the whole world is wider than the Kingdom of England. Although she argued that she had been denied the opportunity to review the evidence, was denied access to legal counsel, and that she had never been an English subject in the first place, she was convicted and sentenced to death. We all know about Prince Andrew and the whole Epstein case, right? I'm a little tired of talking about it, and I'd like to be able to sleep tonight. The British monarchy faces the prospect of one of its most senior figures being questioned by legal professionals over his alleged harm of a minor in a US court. Allegations he has denied. Well, he now has to defend himself as a private citizen, so that's pretty telling in my book. And finally, Queen Elizabeth I never married, but whether she was actually the Virgin Queen has long been in dispute. From the moment she ascended the throne in 1558, rumors circulated of the Queen's secret lovers. The most notable was Robert Dudley, although in 1560, Dudley's wife turned up dead at the bottom of a staircase with her neck broken. And the question became not so much whether the Queen was a virgin, as whether the Queen was a killer. And those questions persist to this day. Number 10, Josef Mengele. Alright, I'm just gonna get this out of the way now. This man is the only entry from the Second World War on today's list, and that's mainly because online guidelines make it practically impossible for me to talk about the evil German dictator or members of his party. So also known as the Angel of Death, Dr. Josef was an anthropologist and SS physician who conducted numerous inhumane medical experiments on the prisoners at Auschwitz. So at Auschwitz, he was one of a number of medical professionals who selected victims to be sentenced to the gas chambers or be spared for his experimental research. He would attempt red fluid transfusions from one twin to another, do amputations to try and sew that part onto another twin, stitch two twins together to form Siamese twins, infect one twin with typhus or another disease, and way too many other experiments. Can you tell he liked twins? And to the surprise of no one, more often than not, the twins would pass away during the procedures, or he would just have them killed afterwards so he could do an autopsy for funsies. If one twin died from a disease, yeah, the other one's going, just to mark the differences between the sick and healthy subjects. The evil doctor was also very interested in heterochromia, where people have irises of different colors, and he would collect eyes and body parts of his victims and send it off for research. He would inject chemicals in victims' eyes to attempt to change their eye color. Now remember, this was before the age of colored contacts. He also experimented on pregnant women before sending them off to the gas chambers and caused incestuous pregnancies, always under the guise of research. Now he tried sex change operations, he tried removing organs, and operating on victims without anesthesia. Oh, and if that wasn't disgusting enough, he tried to prove that Jewish and Romani people were genetically inferior through his morbid experimentation. Throughout his time at Auschwitz, Joseph sent his colleagues in Germany red fluid, body parts, organs, skeletons, and even fetuses that have been taken from prisoners. Yay. Number 9, Putin. Well, Vladimir Putin started off reasonably well, in his career, although there are some stories that his cronies planted explosives in Russian apartment buildings to help him snatch that presidency back in 1999. Granted, the folks who tell those truths keep going missing, so I'll get the Cliff's Notes version and pray I don't get nuked on the spot. 1 month after then-President Boris Yeltsin plucked Putin from obscurity, oh, and by the way, he was a KGB official at the time, which, yeesh, and made him prime minister, an explosion leveled a 9-story apartment building on Moscow's outskirts. Sidebar, if you don't know what the KGB was other than me shuddering just now, they were a security agency that make all the other ones in the world look like young folks trying to enforce rules for funsies. The pre-dawn blast on September 9th of 1999 reduced the building to a smoking pile of rubble, killing more than 100 people. A second building, less than 600 kilometers away, was rocked by an explosion on September 13th, killing 119 this time. Days earlier, a car exploded in a small town bordering the war-ravaged region of Chechnya, where reignited fighting was already spilling into neighboring regions. That blast outside the apartment building in the town of Buyansk killed dozens. If I got the name wrong, I apologize. I'm not the best with every language. French and English are my forte for a reason. It was followed 7 days later by a truck explosive that destroyed a 9-story building in another southern city, killing 17. On September 23rd, Putin asserted to the, everybody, that bad guys in Chechnya were to blame and ordered a massive air campaign within the North Caucasus region. When asked a day later about the campaign targeting what he called terrorists, Putin responded with the phrase that will forever be his catchphrase: "We will pursue them everywhere. We'll catch them in the toilet. We'll wipe them out in the outhouse." The statement became a Putin catchphrase and set the tone for the 20 years of rule that followed. The longer he's in power, the more evil he's become, leveling Grozny, attacking Georgia, grabbing the Crimea, carpet kabooming in Syria, imprisoning, poisoning, and assassinating opponents, and, muzzling the free press. When one would think, oh, it can't get worse. Yeah, he had another surprise. The unprovoked attack of Ukraine, which, an independent and peaceful nation, back in February of 2022. But thanks to the heroism of the Ukrainian people, it's not completely the walkover he expected. So fingers crossed he maybe gets voted out in the next election. Granted, it's a little tricky when people who oppose him have that weird coincidental habit of going missing. Number 8, Korean Kims. It's pretty difficult to distinguish between these two evil leaders, father and son, of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It's a country led by a dictator where the people have no say, and a monarchy with the father being succeeded by the son. Over time, there's actually been 3 Kims in that family that suggests that being evil might just be like a generational thing, part of your genetics, kind of like having an oily nose is one of mine. Under Papa Kim Jong II, aka the Dear Leader, which is a bucket of irony I don't have time to unpack, millions of folks died because of food scarcity. Amnesty International condemned him for leaving millions of North Koreans in poverty and detaining hundreds of thousands of people in prison camps, where, a lot of them died. Now, baby-faced Kim Jong-un was not much of an improvement. Human rights are non-existent, and his true or imagined opponents, or people he just doesn't like, are killed with methods that are going to give me nightmares for the rest of the year. While the general population suffers, the Kims spend whatever money they have on the development of nuclear weapons, because, why not just make things worse? Number 7, Dr. Phil. First, it's very important to understand that Dr. Phil is not a real doctor anymore. While he does have a PhD in psychology and used to have a license, he is no longer a licensed psychologist and cannot legally practice in the state of California, where he lives and films his show. Now, emphasis on used to. Look, while I can't state with certainty why he is no longer licensed, if you go back to 1988, a decade before his first appearance on Oprah, a 19-year-old client of his alleged that he carried on an unprofessional sexual relationship with her, would touch her inappropriately, and intentionally kept her totally dependent on him. The Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists, try saying that 5 times fast, investigated the accusations, along with claims that Dr. Phil inappropriately provided this young lady with part-time temporary employment while still carrying on a therapeutic relationship. Their findings never referenced the accusations of sexual misconduct, but they did discover that the doctor sustained an improper dual relationship with the client by acting both as her therapist and her employer. The board issued him a letter of reprimand, assigned a psychologist to monitor his practice, and required him to take an ethics class and a complete psychological evaluation. Whatever the reason may be, Phil McGraw is no longer a licensed psychologist, and he hasn't been for quite a while. He believes that his show's primary goal is to let people know that it's okay to treat problems and get help, and deliver understandable information about how to live one's life. Which, that's a cute soundbite and all, but Dr. Phil's show regularly exploits people with serious mental illnesses and disabilities for financial and entertainment purposes, if you can even call that entertainment. In one instance, Todd Herzog, a former winner of the hit reality TV show Survivor, appeared on the show in 2013 to discuss his drinking problem. However, he was so drunk that he had to be carried onto the set and lifted into a chair. Before you wonder why a supposedly trained psychologist is something so cruel as to put a man too drunk to walk on national TV, first consider the horrendously immoral and unethical actions that led to this situation. According to Herzog, he was set up. His dressing room came with a full bottle of, spicy juice. After drinking all of it, a staff member supposedly handed him a Xanax, which he took before he even went on stage. Which, all of this doesn't even scrape the surface of the accusations of misconduct and bad psychology that have followed Dr. Phil throughout his career. If I were to say all of those, I'd be here all day. Number 6, Osama Bin Laden. Yeah, he doesn't really need an introduction. Remember 9/11? Yeah, he was the organizer and mastermind, sending himself and way too many innocents to their death. He became America's most wanted, and justice was, finally served on May 2nd of 2011 at 1 a.m. Thank you, Navy SEALs. They also found a huge stash of no-no tapes in his compound, because apparently the self-righteous threat persecuting women for being loose was not above sampling the strictly condemned fruits himself. Number 5, Caligula. Many Roman emperors can be described as self-centered, but this one's appetite for amusement, decadence, and scarlet elixir were on a whole other level. The emperor's short temper and even shorter attention span resulted in countless deaths of his subjects. Caligula killed people for just funsies. In one particularly vile situation, he even ordered his guards to put spectators in an arena to be eaten by wild animals because he was bored during an intermission. I just lose hours scrolling on TikTok and playing silly games on my phone when I get bored, which, isn't often. The emperor was indulgent and purposely wasted money, which led to starvation amongst his subjects. He openly slept with married women and sold his sisters to other men, which I guess seems kind of mild after having people killed to kill your own boredom, but, simply put, he was scummy. Number 4, Jim Jones. As if I was going to do a list of the worst men in history and not include a single cult leader. So back in the 1950s, Indiana native Jim Jones founded the People's Temple, a group that he claimed promoted socialism and equality with religious elements of Christianity. Now, fast forward to the 1970s, he moved his group to California and set them up in a commune-like settlement in Redwood Valley. After he established several locations throughout the state, including its main headquarters in San Francisco, the temple forged ties with many left-wing political figures and claimed to have 20,000 members, even though 3,000 to 5,000 is probably more likely. Jones eventually came to believe that nuclear war was imminent and moved his followers again to the South American country of Guyana, which he thought would be outside the potential danger zone. The group lived there for several years as the People's Temple Agricultural Project, but after former members started speaking out against the Church, San Francisco Congressman Leo Ryan decided to travel to Jonestown to see what was going on. During his visit, a number of temple members expressed a desire to leave with him and accompanied Leo to the local airstrip at Port Ketuma. There, they were intercepted by self-styled temple security guards who opened fire on the group, killing the congressman, 3 journalists, and one of the defectors, as well as injuring 9 others, including Ryan's aide, Jackie Spire. A few seconds of the incident were captured on video by NBC cameraman Bob Brown, one of the journalists that were sadly killed in the attack. That evening in Jonestown, Jones ordered his congregation to drink a concoction of cyanide-laced, grape-flavored Flavor-Aid. Oh, right, this is where the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid comes from, but it actually wasn't Kool-Aid, it was the off-brand stuff. All in all, 918 people died, including 276 minors. When members wept and showed signs of dissent, Jones counseled, "Stop the hysterics. This is not the way for people who are socialists or communists to die. No way for us to die, we must die with some dignity." On a tape, Jones can be heard saying, "Don't be afraid to die," adding that death is just stepping over into another plane and a friend. Jones directed that the youngest folks be killed first, and his wife Marceline apparently protested against this. So then she was forcibly restrained and then joined the other adults in poisoning herself. Some members resisted ending their lives and were injected with fatal doses of cyanide, as were those too young to drink the drink. And some folks thankfully did survive by fleeing through the jungle. Until 9/11, this was the largest loss of American civilian life in history, which sends a chill down my spine to think about. Number 3, Pol Pot. This vile leader of the Khmer Rouge regime was the architect of the Cambodian genocide and devastating policies that led to widespread famine and deaths from preventable diseases. The regime's xenophobic and racist views and policies led to the widespread killings of minorities all throughout Cambodia. The regime also imprisoned and destroyed those who opposed it. Prisoners were subjected to horrific medical experiments, which often resulted in agonizingly drawn-out deaths. Many prisoners, including those too young to consent, were executed in the infamous killing fields and buried in mass graves. To save bullets, they were killed with pickaxes or smashed against trees, which is so much worse. Now, Pol Pot and the regime ended the lives of between 1.5 to 2 million Cambodian citizens, a quarter of the country's population. The most mind-boggling part for me is wondering how this wasn't taught in school, or at least my school growing up. Number 2, Chris Brown. If y'all don't remember, 14 years ago, on the February 8th of 2009, Brown's reputation was immediately tarnished when he physically harmed his then-girlfriend Rihanna after a pre-Grammys event. At the time, Rihanna was only 20, and she was left with visible injuries to her face and was hospitalized as a result. Now, Chris Brown was 19 at the time, and he pleaded guilty and accepted a deal of 1,400 hours of community service, 5 years probation, and domestic violence counseling. And look, while folks try to defend him, he wouldn't have made today's list if he was a single-instance offender. But let's check the history book, shall we? In 2013, Chris Brown was arrested for felony harm in Washington, D.C. after he and his bodyguard were involved in a physical altercation with 2 men outside a hotel. The pair spent 36 hours in jail, and the singer was ordered to stay at least 100 yards away from the man he was accused of harming. In 2015, Brown allegedly hit a man in Las Vegas after an alleged argument over a basketball game at the Palms Casino Resort. The next year, he was sued by his ex-manager, who filed a lawsuit against him, claiming that he had been viciously attacked. And in 2017, he was ordered to stay away from ex-girlfriend Karusha Tron after she put a 5-year restraining order against the singer. He's been sued by other women for sexual harm as well, so how he still has some sort of a successful career boggles my mind. Number 1, Louis B. Mayer. This is one name I didn't even have to look up today. As a lifelong fan of Judy Garland, I've had a bone to pick with him for quite some time. So in front of his staff, Mayer presented a calm, paternal presence. But behind closed doors, he was known for temper tantrums complete with loud sobbing and furious ranting. Most terrifying of all, these rages would go as quickly as they came, and then he would put his icy mask back on. Textbook signs of narcissism. Trust me. Elizabeth Taylor famously clashed with him constantly and dubbed him a monster for the way he tried to rule every detail of her life. Now, some of the worst allegations against Mayer come from Judy Garland. According to her, Mayer frequently groped her and made her sit on his lap. At other times, he would innocently place his hand on her left breast to show her how to sing from the heart. Oh, and this was when she was just a teen. He was particularly awful to Judy, calling her his little hunchback because of her short stature and curved spine, and encouraged her to take diet pills to slim down and look less girlish. Thanks in part to his actions, Judy was plagued with eating disorders and insecurities all the way until her tragic early end. Number 10, Charlie Chaplin. This might have been the biggest shocker to me today. I had no idea he married and had relations with so many girls under the age of 20 when he was much older than them. So in 1918, for starters, Chaplin hastily tied the knot with 17-year-old actress Mildred Harris, a decision he would soon come to regret, saying they were irreconcilably mismatched. Following the divorce, he married 16-year-old Lita Gray, another actress with whom he had a bitter breakup. From the first day of marriage, he made his perception about her clear and called her a little whore. I hope you get what I'm saying there. On their train back to California from the marriage, Chaplin suggested Lita jump off the train to end her misery. Interestingly, Chaplin didn't like his wife, but according to her, he remained a human machine. When she announced she was pregnant for the second time, his behavior got even more erratic. He would take up to 8 showers a day and monitor the listening devices he had installed in her bedroom, and patrol their house's grounds with a pistol at night. By the end of the same year, Lita headed for divorce, stating how Chaplin had pulled that same piece at her and threatened getting rid of her, what she had. Lita's more elaborated passages surfaced when she claimed how throughout the marriage life, Chaplin forced her to gratify his abnormal, unnatural, perverted, and degenerate sexual desires. Next on his list was 22-year-old actress Paulette Goddard. History doesn't have an exact record of the year they married, but she moved into his mansion and got cast as a leading actress in modern times. Charlie bullied her on sets, a primary reason for their separation, telling people how he had to teach her things about acting, and those remarks would leave her crying. And in 1943, while in the middle of a high-profile paternity suit, 54-year-old Chaplin married 18-year-old Una O'Neill, to whom he had been introduced by a Hollywood agent. O'Neill's father, playwright Eugene O'Neill, was so upset by the match that he disinherited her. But unlike his other relationships, this one actually lasted. The two stayed together until Chaplin's death at age 88, and they had 8 descendants. Sheesh, that's a lot of marriages. I'm technically cheating a little bit on the history word here, since Tom Cruise is one of the most recent names on this list, but I couldn't leave a high-ranking Scientology member off of the evil list. He has allegedly reached OT8, which is the highest currently achievable level of the cult. Pardon me. As always, I'm getting ahead of myself. Scientology is a set of beliefs and practices invented by Ron Hubbard, who developed a set of ideas that he called Dianetics, which he represented as a form of therapy. An organization that he established in 1950 to promote it went bankrupt, and he lost the rights to his book in 1952. But he then recharacterized his ideas as a religion for tax purposes and renamed them Scientology. By 1954, he had regained the rights to Dianetics and founded the Church of Scientology, which remains the largest organization promoting the cult. In 1967, he established a new elite group, the Sea Organization, or Sea Org for short, the membership of which was drawn from the most committed members of the church. By 1981, the 21-year-old David Miscavige, who had been one of his closest aides in Sea Org, rose to prominence. Now, Hubbard died at his ranch in Creston, California on January 24th of 1986, and Miscavige succeeded him as the head of the church, a position he holds till this day. It was actually at Tom Cruise's wedding day, to now ex-wife Katie Holmes, that people started realizing that Miscavige's wife Shelley was missing, and when a former Scientology member started asking around, she was punished for asking. There are just too many evil things about the cult for me to talk about right now, but you just gotta know that to be that high-ranking in a cult, you gotta be evil. Number 8, Steve Jobs. While I love and appreciate my iPod and the iPhones I've had over the years, Steve Jobs was no saint. In fact, his success can be attributed to his ruthless behavior, which is kind of commonplace with anybody that makes $1 billion. In his biography, there are plenty of examples, from firing people at Pixar without notice, to storming out of a 5-star hotel that he thought wasn't up to his standards, and berating service workers that he didn't consider up to his standards. Now, while that's all icky, you might be asking where the actual evil is, and don't worry, there's plenty. For starters, he not only neglected his daughter, Lisa Brennan Jobs, who he had with an ex-girlfriend, but he was also just straight up rude and weird to her. In her memoir, Small Fry, she painted him like a jerk who once told her that she smelled like a toilet. However, the creepiest revelation was when Lisa revealed that Steve liked making out with his new wife right in front of her. So, in the book, she describes Steve pulling in his wife for a kiss, moving his hand closer to her breasts while moaning theatrically, and when Lisa tried to excuse herself, Steve stopped her and told her to stay since they were having, in his words, a family moment. It's important that you try to be part of this family. Okay. Moving on before I hurl. Probably his biggest evil moment though was when he cheated his friend and Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak out of money. While the two worked together at Atari, Steve asked his partner to build a scaled-down version of Breakout, saying they would split the profits. And after 4 sleepless nights, Wozniak finished the game and got a whopping $350 for it. He later learned that Steve had lied to him about how much money he made from the game and had actually pocketed most of the profits for himself. Honestly, that's the stuff movie villains get based on. Number 7, Albert Einstein. After you invent the theory of relativity, I guess you can get away with being a little bit of a jerk, and Albert definitely was. From being incredibly racist against Asians in his travel journals to being a serial adulterer. Travel diaries he wrote during a months-long voyage in the 1920s reveal that in his private moments, the Nobel-winning physicist portrayed people of other races, such as, Chinese and Indians, in a stereotypical, dehumanizing way. His unfiltered musings about the people he saw and interacted with during his journey show that, he harbored some pretty racist thoughts about those who didn't look like him. His reflections about the Chinese folks were callous, even insulting. Although he called them industrious, he also described them as filthy and obtuse. He claimed they were a peculiar herd-like nation, often more like automatons than people. He saw them as intellectually inferior, quoting that the Chinese are incapable of being trained to think logically and have no talent for mathematics. He was also not the nicest of folks he allegedly loved, having created a baffling to-do list for his first wife, Valeria Messalina. This list included rules such as, you will see to it that my clothes and linen are kept in order, that I am served 3 regular meals a day in my room, and you will expect no affection from me. You must leave my bedroom or study at once without protesting when I ask you to. Hard pass. Number 6, Jon Hamm. Oh, the handsome Mad Max star has a lot of female fans that love his charm, but the actor, kinda like his famous character, is pretty good at hiding his dark side. In 2015, news broke that the former frat boy was in the middle of a violent hazing ritual in 1991 where he allegedly set a guy on fire. Not only did Jon beat up a pledge by punching him in the kidney, he also led the poor guy around the frat house with the claw of a hammer beneath his genitals. As for the pledge, the whole experience made him sink into a deep depression, which sadly makes sense. This broke my heart, cause until today, I very much enjoyed watching him on screen, but I guess I'll be able to villainize him better in Sucker Punch now. Number 5, Bill Cosby. It emerged in late 2014 that the famed actor, formerly known as America's Dad, sexually harmed dozens of women throughout his career. Cosby was accused by over 60 women of bad things that I can't word. The earliest incidents allegedly took place in the mid-1960s, but dates of the alleged incidents continue all the way up to 2008 in 10 US states and in 1 Canadian province. Now, Cosby has maintained his innocence and repeatedly denied the allegations made against him. Most of the alleged acts fall outside the statute of limitations for criminal legal proceedings, but criminal charges were filed against him in 1 case, and numerous civil lawsuits were brought against him. As of November 2018, I believe 8 related civil suits were active. In July of 2015, some court records were unsealed and released to the public from a specific civil suit, and a full transcription of its deposition was released by a court reporting service. In his testimony, Cosby admitted to casual sex involving recreational use of the sedative Quaaludes with a series of young women, and he acknowledged that his dispensing of the prescription drug was illegal. In December of that year, 3 Class 2 felony charges of aggravated indecent harm were filed against Cosby in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, based on allegations concerning incidents in January of 2004. Now, Cosby was found guilty of 3 counts of aggravated indecent harm at retrial on April 26 of 2018, and on September 25th of the same year, he was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in state prison and fined $25,000 plus the cost of the prosecution, so $43,000 something. In 2014, Judy Huth filed a civil suit against Cosby in California, alleging that he had harmed her in 1975 when she was too young to consent. That trial began in 2022, and thankfully the jury ruled in Huth's favor, so good riddance. Number 4, Elvis. Although everyone knows he famously met wife Priscilla Presley when she was only 14, that wasn't the only time he fraternized with folks that were a little too young. According to a former member of his entourage, Elvis was fascinated with the idea of real young girls. He was particularly obsessed with virginal ones, which he called cherries, and excuse me while I retch. According to Baby Let's Play House, Elvis felt insecure about pleasing older women and would invite groups of young fans to his house for sleepovers instead. And once he met Priscilla, those fantasies didn't change. Determined to keep her virginal until their wedding day, he would instead have roleplay sessions where she would dress up like a schoolgirl and he would dress up like a teacher. Once the two married and had their first spawn, however, escapade stopped. Priscilla wrote in her memoir that Elvis had mentioned to her before they were married that he had never been able to make love to a woman who had given birth. When Elvis finally upgraded to adult woman, dating 21-year-old beauty queen Ginger Alden after his divorce from Priscilla, he continued to treat them like crap. Ginger wrote in her memoir that Elvis once fired a pistol into her bedroom when she refused to bring him yogurt. Lovely. Number 3, Vlad the Impaler. Also known as Vlad Dracula, he was Prince of Wallachia 3 times between 1448 and his death in around 1476 or 77. The character of Dracula was loosely based on Vlad due to his sadistic personality and cruel acts done to the people of Wallachia, where he reigned as prince 3 times between 1448 to 1462 and killed about, only 20% of the population. Works containing the stories about Vlad's cruelty were published in Low German in the Holy Roman Empire before 1480. They described Vlad as a demented psychopath, a gruesome killer, and a masochist Caligula and Nero. One tale explains that Vlad had a big copper cauldron built and put a lid made of wood with holes in it on top. He put people in the cauldron and put their heads in the holes and fastened them there. He then filled it with water and set a fire under it and let people cry their eyes out until they were boiled to death. And he invited just overall frightening, terrible, unheard of punishments. He ordered that women be impaled together with their suckling young on the same stake, stuck on their mother's breasts until they died. Then he had the woman's breast cut off and put the little ones inside head first, thus he had them impaled together together. He impaled victims through the rear end till the stake came out of their mouth. A German pamphlet once read that he had young folks roasted, and then he would feed them to their mothers, and he cut off the breasts of women and forced their husbands to eat them. You know, nightmare cruelty. Number 2, Hugh Hefner. While it might not seem shocking that the man who claimed woman empowerment came from seeing them in bunny suits through the male gaze, you know, being a bad guy, just how awful he was may raise some eyebrows. He manipulated and drugged dozens of young women into taking part in act while masquerading as a champion of freedom. He would also host weekly pig nights, during which he would bring in a dozen schmex workers he considered ugly to have friends. Holly Madison, you know, a lovely woman who dated Hefner for 8 years, told how Hefner refused to use protection during and how the Playboy bunny lifestyle had her considering taking her own life. Linda Lovelace, the 1970s adult video star who found fame with the film Deep Throat, said she was treated like a piece of meat and forced to perform oral German Shepherd while Hefner and his friends watched. I could go into more detail, but I don't think I want to. Number 1, Gandhi. Yeah, sure, he was an activist who led India to independence, but it also turns out that he was kind of a in the book The South African Gandhi, Stretcher Bearer of Empire, it was revealed that Gandhi was a separatist who wrote to the natal parliament that general belief seems to prevail in the colony that the Indians are a little better, if at all, than savages or the natives of Africa. He later wrote to a health officer in Johannesburg that he was concerned about the mixing of the South Africans with the Indians. If that wasn't awful enough, he frequently used his power to take advantage of young women in their late teens and early 20s. His inappropriate behavior was so bad, it caused his personal secretary, R.P. Parasuram, to blast him in a strongly worded letter. Now, his secretary gave him an ultimatum: either stop manhandling women or I'm not working for you anymore. And Gandhi responded by telling him that you're at liberty to leave. Yucky.
Number 10. History. Ruling alongside the pharaoh Akhenaten from 1353 to 1336 BC. Queen Nefertiti, aka the Lady of Grace, aka Hereditary Princess, was born in 1370 BCE. She was born in the Egyptian city of Thebes, and she was only 15 years old when she married the 16-year-old Akhenaten. She worshipped the sun god Aten, and alongside her young husband, she built a new capital city called Amarna, and she also created a new religion, so how's that? She ruled over what's considered the wealthiest period in Egypt history. Nefertiti had 6 children, which were all daughters, which may have had something to do with why we don't know much about her today, but I'll get into that much later on. Number 9. Her death. After changing Egypt's religious and political structure, soaring to new heights as a woman in the Egyptian court, the queen just vanished, just like that. And on this video, we're gonna try and figure out what may have happened to her. During the 12th year of the 17 that her husband ruled for, historical records seem to have just wiped out the queen's legacy. She was gone from everything. Many believe that she didn't actually die, but rather she disguised herself and continued to rule. The next in line after Akhenaten's reign was the pharaoh Smenkhare. Was that really Nefertiti in disguise? I hope so. That would be pretty sweet if we proved that and figured that out. I'm really rooting for that. The reason we believe that she may have disguised herself as a man is because of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, because they ruled with a fake beard in the 15th century. It's known that they had a big traditional fake beard. It's cool. It's like kind of flashy. I kind of want one. I can't grow a beard or a mustache, so I kind of want a fake one myself. Lastly, there's a theory that the reason Nefertiti was banished was because she couldn't produce a male heir. We've gotten closer to uncovering the truth though recently in 2015, when Nicholas Reeves and Mamdouh El-Damadi found what they think is a hidden doorway in King Tut's tomb that contains perhaps the sarcophagus of the lost queen. I'll get into that shortly, but first we need to talk about her modern day origins. Number 8. Berlin bust. Perhaps one of the most popular ancient sculptures of all time was found on December 6, 1913. German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt found this on the floor of the Royal Sculptures Workshop. This figure has some unforgettable details. I mean, first of all, she's breathtaking to look at, and the blue headpiece. These are all important. It was clear that this was Queen Nefertiti from the start. The German team split everything with the Egyptian government, so currently this bust is being held in Berlin. It draws in about 50,000 visitors a year to Berlin's newest museum, a little piece of Egypt all the way over there. We love it. Now, fun little fact about this modern bust: in 2009 there were scans done to it, technology, nice, and it's revealed that underneath this painted layer is limestone carving of a woman so detailed that you can see wrinkles in her cheeks, even a bump on her nose as well. That's like 4K Egypt. It's crazy. Back in 2016, these two artists secretly 3D scanned the bust of the lost queen and then straight up released the files online as a free download. The future is here, I guess. Also, that's a little invasive. Just scanning your head, like, that's really? But 3 years later, officials decided to release that to the public, so here it is, take a look. The Queen Nefertiti 3D bust, scanned by James Bond secretly. Number 7, Monuments Men. It wasn't always a smooth ride for this specific bust. Sometimes it was a bust. I had to, why not? She spent 11 years in the private residence of Germany's expedition founder, Jacques Simon. Cut to 9 years later, that's when King Tut's tomb was discovered, a totally separate event, unbeknownst to them, connected. Howard Carter found King Tut's tomb in 1922, and of course afterwards, the entire world was watching. Just a year later, her bust was finally moved to Berlin. It had a rocky go. It remained in Germans' hands throughout the entire war. Even that big ugly dude with a little mustache said that he himself would never relinquish the head of the queen. So thanks, Spittler. I can't say his name because YouTube. It was hidden in a salt mine throughout the entire Cold War. The Germans would arrive too late though sometimes when stealing rich pieces of art. Like in 1940, for example, they arrived at the Louvre and it was bare. The Mona Lisa was now in a child's bedroom. Curators had moved the pieces, thankfully. But when a bust of a long-lost queen of Egypt was being held in a salt mine in the town of Merkers, the Monuments Men literally saved history. When Sergeant Kenneth C. Lindsay led his team down the 35 miles of tunnel, and aside from the queen's bust, billions of dollars of gold was also found down there, all stolen from the Germans. Number 6. Hidden chamber. Ancient Egyptian architecture is mind-blowing. Even to this day, we're trying to figure out how exactly everything was built. More and more secrets are coming out of all these hidden tombs. It's fascinating. Technology is for sure a helping hand when it comes to learning about our past queens and kings. And for Queen Nefertiti, her final resting place is now believed to be in a secret chamber in King Tut's tomb. This was years ago. Egypt tourist minister Hisham Zazou said the discovery was like a big bang. And I see no lies. It's perhaps one of the biggest discoveries of the 21st century. After radar tests were conducted, Egyptian officials were 90% sure they found a hidden chamber. And it was also full of treasures, so that's neat. And also, we're onto something. Number 5. Original plans. Another theory that surrounds the queen is that King Tut's chamber was actually meant for her. Yeah, listen to this. The former Antiquities Minister doesn't believe this. He strongly stands by his belief that the lost queen was one of the female mummies found in the Valley of the Kings. What's compelling here though is that King Tut passed away at age 19, so many believe his own burial chamber hadn't even been built yet, or finished at least. So instead, they used hers. But a radar survey around the tomb in the Valley of the Kings shows us this hidden chamber behind the north wall of the burial chamber. It's been said before that King Tut's chamber was way too small and there must be more. His stepmom being buried in the same tomb, well, that's certainly a start. We're on to something. Number 4. Tomb alignment. Nobody knows angles like ancient Egyptians. The way they built the pyramids, I mean, they still stand today confidently. We're trying to figure out just how they made the pyramids in the first place. Meanwhile, there's a team inside the pyramids trying to figure out who is even buried in the walls. It's a whole fascinating mystery. Using ground-penetrating radar, researchers were able to find this corridor, this log opening in the bedrock at the exact same depth of King Tut's chamber. And on top of that, these openings are facing the same direction. Tomb KV62 and this new chamber have the same orientation, so of course we're going to believe that they're connected. Because unconnected tombs don't often align, or don't ever align really, so that's also a sign. We're getting close. Let's just give me a shovel. I'll get in there. I'll help out. Be so gentle with everything. I'll feather things off. I've seen National Treasure. Number 3. Brief ruling. The queen was the stepmother of King Tut. Her daughter was married to King Tut, so there's a handful of Egyptologists that believe that right before King Tut's ruling in the 14th century, there was this really small window where Nefertiti ruled as pharaoh. There's also a great deal of historians that believe Nefertiti was no ruler to her husband, King Akhenaten, but we don't have enough evidence quite yet to really know what happened. Hence why we're doing a mystery video on the long-lost queen. Now we get it. The reason we're adamant on finding everything we can is because she literally changed Egyptian religion. Number 2. Her family. The queen's name translates to a beautiful woman has come, and given the fact that we still don't know her parentage, we have to use our national treasure brains here. A beautiful woman has come. Come from where? Well, early Egyptologists believe that Queen Nefertiti came from Syria. Back then, it was Mitanni. Her family roots are still debatable, but there's reason to believe that Nefertiti was actually Egyptian born. In fact, many believe she's related to King Akhenaten. We don't really know. The lost queen did have children of her own. She had 6 daughters, like I mentioned before, 2 of which became queens of Egypt. She may have also been the daughter of A, who at the time was an advisor for the king and ended up becoming pharaoh after King Tut's death in 1323. So we have no idea, but we're getting so close. I feel like we're like years away from finding everything we need to know, but also So this last point is pretty interesting. Number 1, sun god origins. Okay, one of the most interesting facts about all of this was the religious impact that the queen made on ancient Egypt. Both her and King Akhenaten were in a cult. How fascinating is that? They were in the cult of the sun god Aton. In the earliest accounts of the queen, she assisted her husband in a ritual that smited the female enemies of Egypt at the time. There have been a few blocks that have since been recovered from the Theban tombs of the royal butler that depicts the queen wearing her unique blue crown, so definitely her, part of these sun god rituals. So cut to the end of the king's ruling, the Aton was now Egypt's main god. She made a new god. She convinced everyone to believe in a new god. That's incredible. We can't even decide on who's gonna win America's Got Talent. She's like trading in traditions and religions. That's wild.
Number 10, Elizabeth I. Good old Queen Bess is one of the most remembered queens in the British monarchy, male or female. She's a pretty big deal. Elizabeth loved to make her fellow male nobles fall under her spell. She was witty, cunning, and very well liked by her court. However, one of the things that earned her some enemies was establishing a Protestant England. Her sister Mary, her predecessor, fought very hard for the opposite. She was very Catholic, and we will get to how bloody that was later, but Queen Bess a lot of people off, especially Spain. She was supposed to marry the Catholic Spanish king after her sister passed, but she turned him down. This led to a conflict between Protestant England and Catholic Spain, but her navy defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588. Mary, Queen of Scots, laid claim to the English throne and was one of Lizzie's greatest internal threats. Mary was a Catholic, which made all the Catholics of England back her. Mary was also presumed to be behind several assassination attempts against the Queen. Finally, Queen Elizabeth had to take action, and after keeping her cousin hostage for 20 years, she finally had to have her executed. And we'll talk more about her later. Number 9, Catherine the Great. So Catherine the Great was called the Great for a reason. She was a pretty epic woman by most accounts. She even had one of the first vaccines, which is pretty crazy. Though she wasn't actually born in Russia or even Russian at all, Catherine was not content to go down in history quietly. She considered herself an enlightened ruler, and history tends to agree, with aims of prioritizing education for the people. She had many lovers, and there is enough evidence to suggest that the son she had was illegitimate. Peter III of Russia was hardly the man Catherine intended on marrying, and later planned a coup against him, which resulted in her position of power. However, the coup did turn bloody when on July 17th, Peter died under mysterious circumstances. There isn't proof that she was directly involved or even knew about it, but it cast a dark shadow over her reign for the rest of the time. Number 8, Grace O'Malley. We've got enough traditional royalty on this list that we definitely need to spice it up. Enter Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen of Ireland. Pirate Queen! What a title. Definitely considered unholy behavior, Grace abandoned the traditions of women of the time and fled to the sea. There, she took on the waves and perils of Davy Jones' locker with a legendary ferocity. She was born into the clan O'Malley around 1530, around the time of Henry VIII's rule over England and Ireland. Clan O'Malley was a notorious seafaring clan and ruled the southern shore of Clew Bay, Achilleland, and most of the barony of Murrisk for over 300 years. Grace was really well educated and could even converse fully in Latin, Spanish, Scottish, Gaelic, and French. She was not one to be refused, and after spending years fighting the British, she finally met Queen Bess, and not only did she speak Latin to her, but she refused to bow, as she was considered a queen herself by that point. Number 7, Mary, Queen of Scots. I told you I was gonna bring her up. A name you will recognize, as I've already mentioned her before, but in terms of who the villain in that story is, it depends on which side you're telling the story on. Mary's story is full of tragedy, romance, betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. Unlike Lizzie, Mary was a dedicated Catholic and spent the entirety of her reign trying to gather the Catholics against Elizabeth. She had a series of marriages and relationships that led to tragedy every which way she went. Her first husband, the Dauphin of France, died shortly after their marriage. Her second husband she loved until he became a drunkard, and then she just started running things. But he was mysteriously unalived while she was 6 months pregnant. He was inside a building that exploded, but his body landed outside, and it turned out he was strangled. So what happened there? She would later give birth to 2 stillborn sons, but she would have sons later on. She would have a son who would inherit the throne after Elizabeth's death, but it was due to Mary's plotting and scheming that eventually ended her in death. So she did actually plot to kill Elizabeth. So that's a pretty unholy deed, I would say. Number 6, Princess Olga of Kiev. Okay, wow, this woman. One saint you definitely don't want to mess with. Despite being a saint, Princess Olga of Kiev was actually pretty sinful. She was one of the most vicious and vengeful rulers in the history of Kievan Rus, which would later become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Olga took center stage after her husband died and made sure she would never be forgotten. Her husband died in a very gruesome way by the enemies that we're going to talk about in a second. When the people who viciously unalived her husband tried to persuade her to marry their leader, they sent 20 men. Olga told them to wait in their boats, had her men dig a ditch in the meantime, and the next morning buried the men alive. She then lied and told the king she would accept his offer if he sent his best company to retrieve her. He didn't know about all that stuff yet. When they got there, she locked them in a bathhouse and torched it. But it didn't stop there. Olga didn't stop there, that's not her style. She would later host a steak dinner with her enemies in which they were staked. Very Vlad the Impaler, I know. Then she set whole villages on fire by attaching sulfur to pigeons, and then it was just crazy. Damn, like hell has no fury like a woman scorned, let me tell you. Number 5, Queen Isabella I. The Spanish Inquisition, pretty high up there as far as terrifying points in history go. If you weren't willing to convert to Catholicism, you were tormented, interrogated, and burned at the stake. Who was behind this awful time in history? This lady, Queen Isabella I. Technically, as she was fighting for a holy order for the Catholic Church, this can be seen as holy, but was it? Burning people at the stake because they didn't share this belief? Not cool, Isabel. She created a secular government through her reign which allowed for the monarchy to have more power. Being a pious Catholic, she made Catholicism the official religion and created a tribunal to make this happen. Secret service or a secret police that spread fear wherever they went. Her direct influence caused the Jewish population to falter for a really long time after. Number 4, Fridegund of Soissons. Okay, I maybe said that wrong, so I apologize. Kind of impressed with her rise to power. She went from slave attendant to queen. How do you bridge that gap? No idea. Boy was she ferocious. Assassination and manipulation were her main political tools. Fridegund was among a small number of enslaved women in the Merovingian household that became a queen. Merovingian was the OG Central Europe before everything got split up. She survived political dangers and retained her husband's loyalty and could persuade monks and priests to jump onto her plots with ease. She encouraged her husband, the king, to set aside his first wife and then even take the life of his second. But his second wife, Galswinda, had a sister named Brunhild who became the mortal enemy of Fridegund. She had good reason to be. Fridegund continued to do everything she could to secure her position, one assassination after the next. She was a pretty stormy lady. Number 3, Bathory. Okay, alright. Technically not a queen, I get it, but she might as well have been with the power that she had. So fight me. She's remembered as the most evil woman in the world in history, I think. I don't know. That's my opinion. Bathory was the stuff of nightmares. Elizabeth Bathory was born on August 7, 1560 into a prominent Hungarian noble family, making her practically untouchable. She married a very famous war hero who is suspected of gifting Bloody Lizzie with the skills she used to kill. After she died, Bathory became obsessed with immortality, supposedly when one of her servants accidentally spilt blood on her and her skin appeared younger after. Bathory then began her mission of horror, luring over 650 young virgin women to her palace and brutally taking their lives. She was even bold enough to lure daughters of nobility. Before draining them of their blood, she would make them suffer in ways you don't even want to imagine before bathing in the blood itself. When she was finally caught, 3 of her servants were executed, but she was simply locked away in her tower for the rest of her days on house arrest. Ugh. Number 2, Catherine de' Medici, also known as the Serpent Queen. History colors her story as the tale of the evil queen. On one hand, she is remembered for being one of the most powerful French queens in history, and then on the other, she was blamed for the many atrocities that took place during her reign. Her regency was marked by the French wars of religion and the many games Catherine played within them. The Catholics and the Protestants, as previously mentioned, were at war, and she spent a lot of time trying to find peace. Kind of. But she was a passionate Catholic and is believed to have tried to remove a Protestant general from her son's side. When he survived the attack, she lied and convinced her son that the Protestants were responsible, so she scapegoated them. So he authorized taking the lives of their leaders. Enter St. Bartholomew's Massacre. Catherine implicated the general, which resulted in him being the first to be beaten and then tossed out of his own bedroom window. An estimated 3,000 French Protestants were taken out in Paris, but the total countrywide was around 70,000. And And last but not least, Bloody Mary, actually known as Queen Mary I of England, so no, I'm not talking about the girl you say in the mirror 3 times so that she appears and you're like, wow, I'm haunted forever. Queen Mary became known as Bloody Mary due to her vicious tirade against Protestants in England during her reign. She even imprisoned her own sister, Elizabeth, who we mentioned at the beginning of this list, due to suspicions of treason. This was unfounded. She bore her father Henry VIII ill will after the stuff he pulled with the church and after having delegitimized her as his heir for a time. After Mary took the throne and married the Catholic King of Spain, she began carrying out her plan for England to become Catholic once again. In 1555, she revived England's heresy laws and began burning offenders at the stake, starting with her father's longtime advisor, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. She burned over 300 convicted heretics, most of them being common citizens, and dozens more died in prison, hence giving her the name of Bloody Mary.
At number 10, the king of hobbies. Everyone has their interests, right? Like for example, I like video games, and I like watching people scream at their teammates for not helping everyone else out. I'm looking at you, Blake. For kings back in the day, they didn't have people on Rocket League to scream at, so they had to find other interests. For Tsar Peter the Great, he had a lot of interests, and they were all very bizarre. Firstly, he had an obsession with short people, especially dwarves. To him, they were like his real-life dolls or something, and he would hold weddings for them and even hold lavish funerals, complete with small horses pulling a small coffin on a carriage and even a very short priest to hold the ceremony. But other than this obsession with short people, he also dabbled a bit in medicine. He liked watching surgeries be performed like he was trying to be on Grey's Anatomy or something, but when watching the surgeries just wasn't enough for him, he would sometimes perform them himself. Now remember, he's not a doctor, so it's no surprise to learn that these surgeries rarely ever went well and people died. I certainly wouldn't trust him to give me any kind of surgery, but he was a king so he could do whatever he wanted. Peter the Great also loved dentistry. It is said that if you wanted to get all buddy-buddy with the king, all you had to do was let him pull your tooth. Sounds like the guy was one heartbreak away from starting his own medical drama, but in the worst way.
Number 9. Banning coffee. This is the worst of the worst, people. Murad IV, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The guy banned coffee like an absolute monster. No more triples for you. He was born in 1612, and for the most part, his mother was ruling through him because he was so young. That's often the case with most of these young rulers. They just get, hey, you're 7, now you rule a kingdom, enjoy. It's tough, they're not gonna know what's going on. But when he got a little bit older, he put forth these laws, punishable by death, might I add, in order to get things back on track. That was the key. He banned coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. He would actually disguise himself as a civilian during the nighttime and would wander around aimlessly in hopes that he would find one of these dark roast renegades. If you were caught outside having a quick smoke break, you weren't arrested, you didn't get fined, but rather, Murad IV himself would take your head off right there in the streets. No trial, no jury, just straight to execution. All because you're drinking a Bud Light Lime.
At number 8, why you mad? Now this could be a bit of a controversial opinion, but if your name includes the words the mad, I would assume that you're not doing too great, right? I mean, you have to earn that title, and if it's a title that harsh, that simply begs the question, what in the HE double hockey sticks did you do to get that name? Well, for Charles the Mad, he did a lot. Charles became king when he was only 11 years old, so that certainly didn't help his development, and knowing this kind of helps explain a lot of his actions. He was known for getting really angry and throwing fits of rage, and was known to give people the gift of the big sleep, if you know what I mean. Charles didn't always kill people though, only sometimes. Other times he liked to switch things up. Sometimes he would run around his palace pretending to be a wolf. Other times he would go through phases where he just really didn't want to keep up with his personal hygiene, and he would get so gross that he literally had to be cut out of his own clothes. Now I don't know how long you have to go without bathing to get to that point, but really I don't think I want to know the answer to that question. Charles also thought that he was made of glass, and so he would go through phases where he would sit completely still so that he didn't break. Kind of like Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy, but not as, extraterrestrial. Well, maybe he was. That honestly would explain a lot.
Number 7. Party hard. Zhu Houzhao was the emperor of the Ming dynasty in the early 1500s. Now lately we've been talking about kings and queens, we're on part 2s for both now, and there's a good amount who simply just aren't ready, they're too young to rule. Like Joffrey from Game of Thrones. Kings like that actually existed, they were horrible. They were young, they were too young to know what was right and wrong. Plus they usually have some corrupt parents whispering in their ears the entire time. Zhu took the throne at just age 14, and for a while, ministers were confident that he would grow into the role. role and become the leader that he was born to be. Well, when he got older, he transformed a zoo just outside of Beijing. He transformed it into his own personal brothel. Yum. I mean, on one hand, I'm glad the animals are free, but like a zoo? You couldn't find a more romantic place? Can convert an Applebee's to a brothel, maybe? I don't know, something with AC? His final days were spent partying, and some would say a little bit too hard. He got intoxicated and fell from a boat. That's how he ended his life. Honestly, not a bad way to go out. Pretty OG.
At number 6, love game. A lot of kings and queens throughout history have been known to engage in the horizontal hustle a lot. I mean, when you're a ruler of a kingdom, you don't really have much to do in your spare time, so what else are you gonna do? Play a board game? No. These monarchs were getting busy all the time, but there was one king who was just so obsessed with getting a good old pickle tickle that it just became his whole personality. King Philip V was known to be a nymphomaniac, and he liked doing the deed a lot, but because at the time, the Catholic Church said that having sexy time with anyone but your spouse was a sin, the king and his wife were getting busy all the time. Eventually, his first wife caught on to how to use this to her advantage, and she would often refuse to sleep with him until she got her way with anything she suggested or demanded from him. You would think that he would catch on to this game, but maybe his urges were just so strong because he always caved and gave her what he wanted. Obviously, this man did not follow Hoodville. Absolutely not. Just to give you guys an idea of how obsessed this guy was, when his wife was on her deathbed, before she went he literally tried to get one last bang in. On her deathbed. Like, dude, not the time.
Number 5, George V. We love hobbies here on Bumblebee. I mean, I used to collect special quarters growing up. I swear to God. The only time I've ever been good at saving money was when I was 12. I would see one of these and be like, don't touch it. George V turned out he loved stamps. A lot. Like a lot. Since he was a wee young lad, he was collecting these little guys. Here's the unusually impressive part about him though and his hobby. He continued to collect stamps during World War I. This guy was busy, everybody's trying to stay alive, and George is just licking stamps in the library like a prince. Like all collections, it started at an early age and now it's at the point where it's past impressive and it's just borderline strange. This guy had albums on albums of stamps. He had around 330 albums, each with 60 pages full of stamps. Quick maths, that's like 20,000 pages full of stamps. So naturally he was nicknamed the King of Stamps, or rather the King of Philately, the official term for collecting stamps. It's a nice word. Philately. Philately. Back in 1905, he set an all-time stamp record, which I didn't even know that was the thing, and it was the most money ever spent on a single stamp. The guy dropped like 220,000 US on a single stamp. Somebody even asked the prince down the road if he had heard about this idiot who spent 1,400 pounds on a stamp, and he was proud of it. He was like, that was me, you wanna see it? The next King George is a little different, to say the least.
At number 4, womanizer. I'm going to preface this by saying that George IV of England was voted as England's worst king by historians, so that should already tell you a lot about this guy. Georgie here was yet another one of those monarchs who was a little too invested in his intimate conquests, you know? Now we do know that the encounters that he was on were all consensual, so that's a plus. However, he was still creepy about it. Yeah. This man tried everything to get a woman to sleep with him. He would throw a tantrum if she said no, or threaten to end his life if he didn't get to do the 8-legged nature dance, you know? Somehow, this had a pretty good success rate, even though he was not a catch at all. It feels like this was one of those situations where you kind of just give in to make him stop talking, you know? Anyways, this guy was super creepy because on top of the lengths that he would go to just to get some time in the sack, he also kept trophies of his conquests. He would ask each of the people he slept with for a lock of their hair, and he kept them all. Back then, it was kind of common for lovers to keep locks of each other's hair, but George's collection was alarming because of just how many locks of hair there were. After the king died, his brothers found 7,000 envelopes, each with a lock of hair that was, quote, enough to stuff a sofa, end quote. Fun fact, if you want to see this insane collection, it is in a museum in Scotland, so check that out if you want, I guess.
Number 3, Kleptomania Part 2. On our spoiled queens list, Brie mentioned Queen Mary and how she just couldn't stop stealing, which is hilarious to me, just this old lady stealing your shit. Well, the last king of Egypt also had sticky fingers. He was even better at it too. Check this out. Farouk I was the youngest son of Egypt's first king, Vlad I. Now born in 1920 in Alexandria, and in his early days at school, he couldn't concentrate. The king sent him to England even after to hopefully find a better way of teaching, something that works for him, but still it was to no avail. Once the king passed away in 1936, Farouk then got the throne, but also So much property and so much money. He had hundreds of fancy cars, 75,000 acres of land. This guy had it all. Literally, he had anything he could think of, but still he felt like he needed to take more, to steal. At 17 years old, he would slam 12 eggs for breakfast and then wash it down with 30 bottles of beer. Nutritious and delicious. Horrible. On top of the fact that he loved to steal, he was the biggest hoarder. So he had thousands of shirts, randomly. He also had 50 diamond-studded walking sticks for some reason, and like a prince such as myself, he too collected coins. I mean, his collection was much nicer, but still, great minds think alike. Spoiled minds think alike, rather. Oh shit, this is eye-opening. One of the most bizarre facts about Farouk was he pickpocketed Winston Churchill once. He took the guy's watch. After everything I just said, he still decided to steal his watch. What a gem. We love him. Yeah.
At number 2, the King of Pettiness. Let's talk about a ruler that the Indian state of Alwar has described as controversial. If his own people are calling him controversial, then you know something's up, and boy, you better strap in because you're in for a wild ride with this one. Maharaja Jai Singh was pretty eccentric in a pretty dark way. He was known to have a temper and act on impulse, and he did some very questionable and downright scary things. He was known to be very competitive and hated to lose. One time while playing polo, he and his team lost, and so in retaliation he blamed the horse he was using and made the horse get extra crispy. He fired his horse. I'm sure you know where I'm going with that. If not, use your noodle, I don't know. Unfortunately, the cruelty towards living things didn't stop at animals, and he was also known to kidnap women from the streets and go all criminal minds on them. On a slightly lighter note, though, the Maharaja was also known to be very petty. Once he went into a Rolls-Royce dealership, and the person working there thought that he was broke and ignored him. Thinking that this was insanely rude, he bought 7 Rolls-Royces, sent them back to India, and used them to pick up garbage. This guy was really just doing the absolute most.
And coming in at our number 1 spot, King Ludwig II. Home renovation shows rock my world. I can watch Love It or List It for months at a time. It's the dream, building your own home one day, and if you're a king, well, it's pretty easy to get that done. In our Spoiled Queens Part 2, I mentioned a princess that had a house made of ice, literal ice. Well, King Ludwig II had numerous castles built to resemble fairy tales. Literally, like fairy tales. I gotta admit, I kind of love this a lot. Ludwig was only 18 when he became the King of Bavaria in 1864, and then he had castles, like castles, more than one, built after he was inspired from romantic literature and spending some time at the opera. The kid was a dreamer, you gotta love it. He would spend his nights in one castle looking through a telescope at his new castle being built, so he would just watch it all night. That's like the king's way of waiting for your Amazon delivery. Just standing there, just like, oh, it's coming. 17 years and it's done. Just 4 years in, he designed his own castle, and to this day, it's one of the most photographed places in the world. Neuschwanstein Castle. Go check it out. It's literally a paradise.
At number 10, royal enemas. Apparently, back in the day, enemas were all the rage amongst the elite. It was believed that enemas were good for your health, so everyone was doing it to try and live a little longer than the rest of those commoners and peasants. One person who really just couldn't get enough enemas in his life was King Louis XIV. It is believed that over the course of his life, Louis XIV received thousands of enemas. When I tell you this guy was obsessed, I'm not kidding. One year, Louis received 212 enemas in just the 1 year. And of course, he had to make his enemas a little jazzy and couldn't just use water like any other person. Oh no. My guy was using things like almond milk. His enemas were also sometimes scented with orange or rose, and sometimes even colored just to make it a little more special. To get an idea of just how obsessed the elite were with receiving enemas, just think about the fact that a French duchess once received one during a court ball. The duchess was in the middle of having a conversation with Louis XIV, and during this conversation, one of her maids came over, snuck under her dress, and gave the duchess an enema on the spot. Ew. These people were so weird. At number 9, pampered pony. I'm sure I can speak for most people when I say when you have a pet, you love and care for that thing like it is your child, right? Well, one Roman emperor might have taken that concept a little bit too far, because saying that he was obsessed with his horse is an understatement. The Roman emperor known as Caligula had a horse named Incitatus. Caligula was a horse racing enthusiast, so Incitatus was his pride and joy, and not too many people were all that thrilled about it, to be honest. When I tell you this horse horse was treated better than most people have ever been. I'm not kidding. The horse's stall was made out of marble, his manger was made out of ivory, and he was even fed oats flaked with gold. Caligula was also very adamant about his horse receiving a good and restful sleep before a race, and he was so serious about it that he made guards stand outside of the horse's stable to make sure that the horse remained undisturbed while it slept. This horse even had its own furniture. Like, what is he gonna do with it? He's a horse. Caligula was so fond of his horse that he even made it a priest and promised to make him consul, which was the lead position in the Roman government after the emperor, highly coveted by senators. This was the last straw for people because the emperor was putting his horse above his own people, so he was assassinated. Now, before I carry on telling you guys about the wild and crazy things that kings did back in the day, I would like to first ask you guys to consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and also maybe think about subscribing as well to see more videos like this one. At number 8, Mumia medicine. It's safe to say that medicine from the past is very different from modern times. These days we have pharmaceuticals to treat illnesses, but back in the days of old there were very different and quite questionable methods of treating ailments, and one of those methods included cannibalism. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it was common practice for elites like priests, kings, and other nobles to consume remedies that included human bones, blood, and fat as medicine to treat ailments from headaches to epilepsy, and this practice was called mumia medicine. At first, it started with people using Egyptian mummies and skulls from Irish graves for use in medicine, as bones would be ground and used in different tinctures for various uses. But soon, other parts of the body started to be used. Human fat was later used to treat ailments on the outside of the body, and blood would be consumed as well, as it was believed to contain the vitality of life. Several monarchs were known to use mumia medicine, like Charles II and William II of England, Francois I of France, and Christian IV of Denmark. At number 7, kissing sheets. For thousands of years, monarchs worried about the threat of being poisoned by their enemies, and so they thought of an array of precautions to take in order to prevent being taken out by some kind of spicy death sauce or something. Many monarchs hired tasters to try their food before it was given to the king to make sure that it wasn't poisoned, but some monarchs were also afraid of being poisoned through something that they touched. This is why Henry VIII hired someone with a very important job to make sure that his bed wasn't poisoned. The person who was tasked with making the king's bed was also required to kiss every part of his bed in the morning. They would kiss the pillows, sheets, and blankets to prove that someone hadn't smeared poison on it. The king was also concerned with people poisoning clothing too, so his clothes as well as his son's clothes were also tested for poison before getting dressed. At number 6, eternal youth. I know that there are a lot of people out there who want to live forever. I am one of those people. I am afraid of dying, but I also want to see what humanity will look like many years from now until the sun consumes the earth. Unfortunately, that's kind of impossible, at least for now, until we come up with some kind of way to make people live longer. But this idea of prolonging your life has been around for thousands of years, and one Chinese emperor was super obsessed with the idea and really tried his best to live for at least another 10,000 years. Emperor Ying Zheng was obsessed with finding a magic elixir that would make him live longer, and he demanded that his subjects find this immortality elixir for him. Now, even though he brought a lot of prosperity to people during his rule, he never let go of his demand for immortality, and it put a lot of pressure on his underlings to find him something to help him live forever, but obviously that didn't happen. He was so concerned with his lifespan that he even brought magicians into his court. His obsession alienated him from his people, and after all of that effort trying to live longer, he died at the age of 49. At number 5, no bathing. These days, bathing is kind of a necessary thing. Gotta be clean, you have to smell nice, you have to practice proper hygiene. But back in the olden days, this was the complete opposite, and nobles rarely ever bathed, and it was kind of a trend. Over time, physicians began to believe that bathing was dangerous, and obviously the nobility tried to protect their lives and well-being at all costs, and so they just stopped bathing. In a popular 16th century medical book, it was advised, quote, "Use not baths or stews nor sweat too much, for all openeth pores of a man's body maketh the venomous air to open and for to infect the blood," end quote. So yeah, they thought that taking a bath would make you sick. In the late 15th century, Queen Isabella of Spain would go around bragging about the fact that she had only ever bathed twice in her whole life. Weird flex, but okay. King James IV apparently never bathed, and his hygiene was so bad that he passed on lice to other people who went into a room that was frequented by the king. He also never washed his hands before eating and would just rub his fingers with the wet end of a napkin. These people were gross. At number 4, Prankster King. You know that you're a spoiled king when you can pull pranks on people constantly and never have anyone try and stop you or fight back. This was basically the life of King Christian VII of Denmark, who was known for being pretty childish and playing pranks on people his whole life. He was a troublemaker through and through. He was known to play pranks on his grandmother by putting pins in her throne, and he would throw things at her, and he even ran through the streets with his friend and his mistress, destroying shops and patronizing brothels. He even made his own torture rack, had himself tied to it, and flogged. Why? I have an idea, but I don't want to think about that one too hard. One of the other weird things that he was known to do was leapfrog over dignitaries when they would bow to him. This guy was really quite immature. At number 3, saints in bed. I understand the desire to feel protected by whatever gods or saints you might believe in. That's one of the whole points of religion. However, I think some people can take that idea a little bit too far, and by some people I mean the Spanish royal family. These guys took religion very, very seriously, and they believed that following religion heavily would allow God to heal them when they were sick. So, when a member of the royal family was ill, doctors would remove body parts or even entire corpses of saints from churches and monasteries and would put them in bed with the person who was ill. Yeah, they slept with the corpses of dead saints to be healed of their sickness. Could you imagine if that was still how medicine was practiced today? At number 2, rat court-martial. There has been a record of many kings throughout history who were complete children through and through. Even though many of them grew into adulthood, they still acted immature, and one of the greatest examples of that was Peter III of Russia. He was not a good ruler or a good husband to his wife, who would later become Catherine the Great. Peter spent every night in bed with her playing toy soldiers because he was obsessed with his little dolls. He was so obsessed, in fact, that when a rat chewed the head off one of his toy soldiers, he was so upset that he held a proper military court-martial for the rat. He proclaimed the rat guilty of treason and had it hung in a tiny gallows that he had built for the occasion. It was weird, but in the end that bizarre event helped Catherine overthrow her husband, so I guess it kind of worked out for someone. And finally, at number 1, groom of the stool. Guys, I found the worst job in history. You think working at the 1-star Domino's Pizza in your neighborhood is bad? Wait until you find out about the groom of the stool. The groom of the stool was a job created during the reign of Henry VIII, where the role was to monitor and assist the king in his bowel movements. They would carry around a commode at all times, and they were also tasked with monitoring the king's diet and meal times, and would organize the king's days around his break times. They were also tasked with undressing the king for him to do his business, and it's also been suggested that they would have had to, quote, cleanse the royal posterior as well. Sounds like a pretty crappy job to me, but I'm not funny. I'll leave.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Heart of Glass. Alexandria of Bavaria, the royal who believed she had swallowed a grand piano made of glass. I'm not joking, yeah, she was a princess, so not technically a queen, but this is so insane that I had to kick off this list with it. The 23-year-old Bavarian princess was quite the scholar. She was known to enjoy literature, but she equally put energy into convincing those around her that she'd swallowed a piano made entirely of glass when she was a wee child. She grew up afraid that her inner piano would shatter. We have an inner demon, she has an inner piano made of glass. So she would enter rooms slowly and sideways, I'm not kidding, to, you know, avoid cracking that personal piano problem. Just like King Charles VI, he thought he was going to break at any given moment. Saying you were made of glass was quite an uncommon delusion. The victims were more often than not royalty. They had glass, they watched this fancy material shatter in their hands all the time. No wonder, it probably scared them. There's actually a play on this glass delusion. It's called The Glass Piano by Alex Sobler. Quite recent too, apparently it's a blast. Check it out if you have the chance. We love that. Keep writing plays about glass pianos. This is insane.
At number 9, Rosemary's Baby. Back in the days of old, it was very important to the monarchy to have a male heir. Many kings throughout history have been known to get very upset when they weren't given a son to inherit the throne, and they put a lot of pressure on their wives to give them a boy. Why? I don't know. The boy's kinda stuck. Anyway, this probably drove a lot of people crazy, but there is at least one confirmed case of crazy baby fever from Maria Eleonora. She kept trying to have a baby, but when she finally got pregnant, everyone was hoping for a boy. Unfortunately, the odds weren't in her favor and she gave birth to a little girl instead. People knew that Maria would get absolutely triggered upon learning of her baby's gender, so they kept it a secret from her as long as they could, but eventually they had to tell her, and Maria was pissed. She really went looking for that receipt to return that baby and get a refund or at least a store credit. When she found out the baby was a girl, the queen reacted by saying, quote, "Instead of a son, I am given a daughter, dark and ugly with a great nose and black eyes. Take her from me, I will not have such a monster." End quote. Like, damn, tell her how you really feel. After that, mysterious things started happening to this baby, like a wooden beam mysteriously falling into the baby's crib and somehow accidentally falling down the stairs. Even the nurse once dropped the poor kid onto the stone floor. Like, I get it, you're disappointed, but that's still your kid, and a lot of people aren't given that privilege, so be grateful for your spawn.
Number 8. Dirty talk. Going back to the 15th century to Queen Isabella of Spain, now it's not uncommon for queens to brag, be it about their wealth, status, their mans, you name it. But to brag that you've only bathed twice in your life, that's a bit odd. What's the deal with this? Okay, well, back in 537 AD, Rome had 11 aqueducts that ran over about 1,000 public fountains, okay? Over 900 bathhouses included. It was quite important, but when invading Goths cut them off, the Catholic Church literally had no idea how to fix the problem. So instead, they just told everybody that bathing was a sin only practiced by pagans. So at one point in history, you could have ran a bath, thrown in a bath bomb, relaxed for an hour, got out, and then immediately you're a sinner. Worst of the worst too. How dare you having a bath on Monday afternoon, you monster, you pagan monster. The Old Spice guy would have rocked their world.
At number 7, Mother Knows Best. I think after hearing about these queens who've done some dark things to get their way, you would think that it's safe to say you don't mess with a woman and her plight for power. Unless you want to end up 6 feet under, that is. One Roman Empress, Julia Agrippina of Rome, was pretty spoiled already. She lived a lavish life, her husband was the emperor, and she had a family. But that just wasn't enough for her, and she wanted it all. Julia was quite ambitious, and she spent most of her early life trying to dethrone her predecessors. She believed that she and her son had a claim to the Roman throne by birthright, and so she bamboozled her way into royalty by tricking her uncle Claudius into changing Roman law so that they could get married. Ew. Suddenly though, after they got married and she became empress, Claudius died, and most people think that Julia had something to do with it. That's likely the case. She and her son Nero went on to rule Rome from 49 to 54 CE. Julia stayed by her son's side for as long as she could so that she could hold on to her power, but eventually Nero got tired of his mother manipulating him and he had her forced out of power. Julia, as you could imagine, was furious because power was the one thing in the world that she desired most, and so she rallied a group of supporters to try and overthrow her son, but the plans backfired and she was expelled instead. Talk about ambition getting the best of you.
Number 6. We are family. The last queen of Madagascar, Queen Ranavalona, was one of the worst. She was born in 1788 and she ruled over the kingdom for 33 years. She was so cruel and violent that she would often choose violence first in order to preserve independence over the island. She's known as the most ruthless queen in history. After the death of her husband, she just went mad with that new power. In the late 1700s, her king brought peace to the land, but of course there were traditionalists who opposed him. The king's uncle at one point tried to take him out, but a local warned the king. That king repaid the local by adopting his daughter, Ranavalona, to marry his son, Prince Radama. Now, when her prince was alive, they didn't get along at all. And then come 1810, the king passed away, giving Ranavalona the promotion of a lifetime. It's also theorized that she poisoned him too, so that's horrible. Ranavalona kept away the advances of the French and the British and left bodies of those who tried to attack out for display on the beach. Lovely, like bobbleheads. In 1845, Queen Ranavalona ordered 50,000 subjects to build roads across the jungle for 4 months straight for this massive buffalo hunt. Well, 10,000 of those poor souls died of starvation and exhaustion, and also not one buffalo was hunted nor seen. Great plan.
At number 5, Queen Batman. Batman. He is justice. we know this? Well, long before Batman, there was a queen who sought vengeance, and she did it in the most brutal way. Olga of Kiev became queen regent in 945 CE after her husband was killed because her son was just too young to rule yet. Olga knew that once her son was old enough to be crowned king, her power would be taken away, so she had to do the most that she could with her power while it still lasted, and so she used her powers as monarch to seek justice for her husband's death. She was able to get her husband's killers captured and killed using scalding water, but she soon developed a thirst for suffering apparently, and she just kept on going after people. She would not rest until everyone associated with the people who killed her husband were all eliminated. So if you ever breathe in the general vicinity of the guy who offed her hubby, you could kiss your life goodbye. Olga took hundreds of people out of the tribe that her killers were from. She devised a plan to bury their tribe's leaders alive, and she even came up with a plan to set fire to their entire village. It is said that Olga may have locked the tribe's leaders in a bathhouse and burned it down, but we don't know for sure. All we know is that she definitely was not okay.
Number 4, no crust. This next one, honestly, I stand by. I see no wrong here. Queen Elizabeth II, still rocking to this day. She's been known for a few funny, quirky queen things. Like one of my favorites, for example, she has somebody on payroll who breaks in new shoes for the queen. Every time I buy Vans, my ankle always does that little foot rub. If only I were a queen, damn it. But we're talking about unusual things here, and one of the weirdest things I've ever heard is that the queen has refused crust on her sandwiches. This has been a no-go for about 150 years. It's not recent at all. You might be thinking, oh, maybe she's old, she can't chew her jawbones. Nope. Way back. This goes way back for no reason. Right around the time of Queen Victoria and her husband Albert. They viewed anything square-shaped as bad luck because it looked like a coffin. I've never thought about death while eating grilled cheese, but now I definitely will. Thank you. This must be a pretty scary job, cutting the crust off the queen's bread. My hands would be shaking the entire time. Also, diagonal or down the middle? Let us know. There's only one right answer.
At number 3, Evil Empress. This next empress is pretty similar to Olga of Kiev, whom I talked about earlier. Empress Wu Zetian also had a thirst for blood and suffering, but not towards people who have necessarily wronged her. You see, when she came into power, she was determined to keep that power by any means necessary, so she had all of her rivals killed. So anyone who could possibly overthrow her or come for her seat on the throne was eliminated. The empress ordered the execution of the previous empress, as well as members of her own family, including her own newborn daughter. She didn't want to risk anyone taking away her power, including her own offspring apparently. She didn't hold back on the methods of eliminating her rivals either. Yeah, sure, she could have just done a 1-2 stabby stabby and called it a day, but that's no fun. Instead, she had people poisoned, strangled, mutilated, or even burned or boiled alive. Good soup. Eventually, she retired from her part-time job of sending people back to their maker and started spending more time with her lovers and getting addicted to aphrodisiacs. People weren't quick to forget about all that bloodshed though, and so to get back at her, they had all of her lovers killed and the empress was exiled. She got a little too greedy and karma came back with a vengeance.
Number 2, Ice Palace. If you're a fan of the film Frozen, this next one is gonna get you jazzed right up. Anna Ivanova, the Empress of Russia from 1730 to 1740. Okay, so in celebration over their victory with the Ottoman Empire, Anna gave the order to build an ice house, this massive ice palace. Best place to cool down if you ask me. I'll leave. This ice palace was pretty impressive. If I was there, I would 100% lick the walls. Obviously, someone definitely did, you know that for a fact. 20 meters by 50 meters, and even more impressive, there were ice trees and ice birds sculpted inside. How magical is that? Anna arranged this marriage with a prince and one of her maids. Now they didn't know each other, they were forced to ride an elephant, and all the guests were dressed up like clowns. Yep, that's all valid, that's all accurate. You heard me. You may be thinking, wait a minute Taylor, an ice palace in Russia, was that maybe cold? Yeah, it was an absolute nightmare. Anna made the guest party all night, freezing cold, they all got sick, dressed like clowns. I went to an ice hotel in Quebec once. Spoiler alert, it's cold and boring. There, I just saved you $70. You're welcome.
And finally at number 1, gladiator games and chill. If you didn't ever have to go to work and you could just lounge around all day, what would you do with your time? Really, anything could be possible. You could be like the Bruno Mars lazy song. Well, there's one empress from back in ancient Rome who occupied her time with the company of others. Apparently, Empress Valeria Messalina was famous for her exploits. Since she was empress and she had all this time and money and no one to tell her no, she took full advantage of that and bought a house, turned it into a brothel, and made that her side hustle. A lot like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. Though she had a collection of women who worked there, she also was known to invite upper class ladies to participate in the nightly escapades as well. And don't think that Valeria did jump in as well. She was considered to be quite something in the sack. In the wise words of Ludacris and Little John, she was a lady in the streets but a freak in the bed. The Empress was known to be such a hardcore participant that she would win games where they would compete to sleep with the most men in one night. One time she won the round after being with 25 men. One night. She did the absolute most, but at least she was having fun.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the Empress of Austria. The saying wrong place at the wrong time couldn't be used more in this case. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, she was sadly taken out by somebody who just wanted to attack a royal. He didn't have anything against Elizabeth per se, this man was an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini, and that fateful day, September 10th, 1898, he took the Empress's life. In his own admission, Luigi stated that he had nothing against the Empress on a personal level at all. So what had happened was he intended on taking the life of the Duke of Orleans, but when Luigi arrived a little too late in Geneva, the opportunity to do so had passed. He looked at a local newspaper, saw Elizabeth, and found out where she was staying, and he waited for her to leave that hotel. That's how easy it was. People are so creepy. Keep an eye open. If you're a queen, keep your eyes open. This is scary. Number 9. Royal curse. The remains of Polish queens and kings were discovered back in April 1931 in a crypt in Vilnius. Polish researchers didn't even know what they were in for. I mean, a storm had flooded a cathedral and they threw down sandbags to preserve the area, but on the night of April 25th, they had followed the water into this lost chamber that held the remains of Polish kings and queens. These remains, with the crowns still attached, might I add, were from the 15th century. What a find, right? Well, sadly the remains were all over this flooded tomb now. It wasn't really in one spot. It was horrible. And now after these discoveries, that's when things got really mysterious. Those involved in the findings began to die off in unusual circumstances, one after another. And it happened pretty quick too. One professor had died after falling down a shaft in his apartment. He had a heart attack. An engineer had died before him as well due to undisclosed medical issues. Okay. Another professor years later who worked in the crypt as well became paralyzed at age 62. A sculptor involved died when untying his shoelace. Just the weirdest way to go out. That's the only details that we know. Just, I don't know, use your imagination I guess. Maybe he fell and hit his head. That's sad, it's tragic. And another professor died in 1936 shortly after visiting the crypt as well. I sure hope this isn't an ancient curse because these guys were trying to preserve their history and avoid the crypt from flooding. Like, I don't know, we need a Ouija board to clear this whole thing up. We were trying to help you with the sandbags. Number 8, Queen Caroline. In a list of unusual ways that people have died, odds are it's going to get a little gruesome, a little messy. After all, that's why you clicked this video, right? Right? Some ancient queens die natural causes and then history remembers them for their reign. In this case, history remembers Queen Caroline for the way that she died. It was written in an epigram from the 18th century from a poet named Alexander Pope. He wrote down, "Here lies wrapped up in 40,000 towels, the only proof that Caroline had bowels." It rhymes? Like, come on, man, you didn't have to do this. This is horrible. That's like a prank almost. I can't believe somebody was like, yeah, write that down. That's good, that's good. Did it rhyme? Yeah, she'd like that for sure. R.I.P. Number 7, Anne Boleyn. The second wife of King Henry VIII. Yes, we have a few on this list. She was found guilty of treason and she had been charged with having sexual relationships with 5 others, including Lord Rochford, aka her brother, George Boleyn. Yeah, the ancient days were a little bit odd. She had also apparently had relations with Sir Henry Norris, the king's close friend. And when I say close friend, I mean he was the groom of the stool, so they were tight. He literally would wipe his. So on top of this, Anne was also found guilty of conspiring to kill her husband. Now, it's since been proven that these crimes were a bunch of rubbish, basically. Anne wasn't even present when these events went down. She was still recovering from the birth of her daughter, future Elizabeth I, so there's no way in hell she was fooling around with the groom of the stool in October 1533. All 5 guys involved were executed on Tower Hill in May 1536, and then 2 days later, Anne joked about her little neck before being taken out with a sword as well. There wasn't even a coffin for her burial. Somebody had to go and get an old elm chest from the Tower Armory. They used a chest to bury her body near her brother, Lord Rochford. A chest. Horrible. That's so horrible. Number 6. Mary Queen of Scots. If you're a murderino, this one's pretty juicy, listen up. Back in 1565, Mary was determined to take the throne for herself. When Mary was just 6 days old, her father, King James V, had passed away, so she ascended to the throne. She was about to marry the King of France in 1558, but he passed away, so she returned to Scotland as the country's monarch. Her next plan was to marry her cousin, Lord Darnley, so now if something were to happen to Elizabeth, Mary would be yet again lined up for the throne. That cousin ended up dying in a random explosion, and then years later, in 1568, Queen Elizabeth had welcomed Mary after she fled to England. So Mary was close, but now what? Well, Elizabeth had found out that Mary was involved in English Catholic and Spanish plots to overthrow her, so she was then placed on house arrest. Fair, more than fair, more than fair. Cut to 19 years later, 1586, a letter had emerged revealing that Mary was involved in a plot to have her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, killed. She was then sentenced to death and her head was taken off for treason. History is dark, my friends. Even if you're family, shit gets crazy. Number 5. Charlotte Augusta. Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales lost her life in 1817, and when I say ancient, this is probably the most recent that I'll go, because I know ancient means way back. I gotcha. But I have to include this one because as far as royals go, she was loved at this time. She ended up falling in love with Britain's Prince Leopold, but a year and a half later, she died giving birth. She was healthy at the time. She was only 21 years old when this happened. Charlotte was lined up to be the queen one day, and historical accounts say that the doctors here were at fault. Charlotte's tragic passing had vendors running out of black fabric. That's how rocked the public was right after this. Just massive displays of grief. What do you guys think? Comment down below. Was this a doctor conspiracy or just classic medieval times? It's the olden days. We can't really do as much. Let us know. Number 4. Catherine Howard. Queen of England from 1540 to 1541. Such a short amount of time, but why? Being the 5th wife of King Henry VIII, cousin to Anne Boleyn, referred to by King Henry as his rose without a thorn, he just gave her all the gifts and she was just 19 years old. Sounds great so far, but you know, because of his list, things won't end up well. Their marriage didn't even last a year until rumors, not letters or eyewitnesses, rumors started spreading about infidelity. There was a small amount of evidence that suggested that she had been romantically involved with somebody beforehand, so a jealous mad king got jealous and mad again. Shocker. You had me at 5th wife, I don't know. She was executed for adultery and treason at the Tower Green on February 13th, 1542. Number 3. Catherine Parr. When Catherine Parr got a position in Princess Mary's house in 1542, she met King Henry VIII. She was smart, she was 30 years old, so it was a step in the right direction age-wise when it comes to these queens and King Henry. Not that there's anything wrong with marrying somebody younger, that's not what I'm saying, but it's just, well, look at this list. All of these people died, spoiler alert, so the older the better at least. I don't know. She was seen as somebody who could nurse the king in his dying age, so the public liked her. She was the first English queen also to write and publish her own books. Now, come 1543, Catherine gave up her man, Thomas Seymour, to marry the king. The two got married that July at Hampton Court Palace, and from that point on, her beliefs were deemed dangerous. Queen Catherine was a supporter of the English Reformation, and Catherine's religious opponents were plotting against her and they tried to convince the king that she was dangerous. Her arrest was even planned, everything was kind of going in a bad direction. And then Catherine went to King Henry right away and then asked for forgiveness herself. You know, for pushing her views too far many times before, and he forgave her. Meanwhile, others are losing heads for having relationships. Okay? Her and Henry were married for 5 years, and then after his death, she married Thomas Seymour just a few months later. And then come September 1548, she died after giving birth to her daughter. The account of her death comes from a lady-in-waiting and friend of Catherine Parr, comes from Elizabeth Tyrant, only her account is fishy because she never liked Thomas Seymour to begin with. She made it seem like Catherine was speaking about her husband in a negative manner when she was dying, and this is the only time in history where that's ever been an idea. So what do you think? It's like broken telephone, but hundreds of years ago. I'm like, maybe she was friends? I don't know. Sounds like a conspiracy. Number 2, Anne of Cleves. Where to even begin here? Okay, this one is sad, man. Anne was right in the middle of Henry's wives. She was married to King Henry for 6 months, and it was seen as quite strategic in a way. Henry's chief minister convinced him to marry one of the sisters of Germany's Duke of Cleves, either Anne or Amelia. So in order to decide, Henry requested that Hans Holbein travel to Cleves to paint a portrait of each sister. This is like the birth of Tinder right now. I'm not joking, this actually happened. This man compared portraits and then chose Anne because every man praiseth her beauty. She was compared to the silver moon. Yeah, try that on a dating site. I praiseth thou beauty, madam. Super swipe. A treaty was signed, and a few weeks later Anne arrived to England. Henry was beyond upset because she looked nothing like she did in her portrait. Yep, real life, this is what really happened. He tried to stop the wedding because of this, but it was too late. They had to follow through, and they got married on January 6, 1540. Anne later accepted the divorce, because obviously a divorce was in play after what you just heard, and then she lived as the king's sister peacefully until her death in 1557. Of all the ways to be remembered in history, King Henry made this horrible for Anne. And finally, number 1, Cleopatra. Last of the Egyptian pharaohs and last on our list. One of the biggest questions to this day is just how Cleopatra died. What happened? It's been rumored for a while that a snake bite was the culprit, but many believe that Cleopatra also allowed a poisonous snake to end her life. They think it was a bite from an asp. But there's also a large amount of historians that also believe that she poisoned herself using a hairpin. Her lover Antony fell on his own sword, but Cleopatra, she just poked herself. She barely lost blood. Now, as a youngin', we have to note that Cleopatra was brilliant. She was also interested in learning specifically about chemistry. So this theory about her poisoning herself doesn't sound very far-fetched. Until we find her body, we'll really never know. What do you guys think?